Alright guys, so now that we have a custom row design or a custom list item design, we need to make a custom adapter, because remember, adapter is essentially responsible for taking code and converting it to this list item right here. So the one we had by default is right here, simple list item, and that only works with text. However, we have images and kind of weird layout right now, so that's why we need to create a custom one. So go to your package, and this is just going to be one file. So right click, new Java class, and I'm just going to name it custom adapter. Hit OK. And actually I already have my imports copied, so I'm going to paste them right in there. So if you want to pause the video and copy all those, then go ahead. Or if you just want to copy it from my website, you can do that too, whatever. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is get rid of public, so we just have class, and I want to, actually you need to inherit from array adapter. So this essentially says, okay, what we're creating here is an array adapter, or an adapter to take an array and convert it to our own custom view. And let me arrange this. Alright, so just like before, right in here, what we need to say is what data are we working with? Well, the array that we're going to enter is just an array of strings, so that's why we put string right there. So it's giving us an error because it says whenever you make an array adapter or you're trying to convert code to that view, you first need to use the constructor. So hit Alt, Insert, Constructor, array adapter, right like there. And as you see, whenever we have the constructor, the error disappears. So we have two parameters that got passed in, context and int resource. Now this int resource right here is going to be that array itself. Now instead of an integer, it was actually a string array. So we're going to be passing in a string array as our resource, and we'll just call it foods so we can work with it. So of course we need to change this to foods. Now this context, whenever you see context, it just means information, and for right now it's just background information that whenever you pass it along to the superclass it needs. So we don't really have to worry about that. It's behind the scenes, pretty cool. However, what we do need is the superclass needs one more parameter, and in the middle put r.layout, and whatever you named your file, I named mine custom row, stick that right in there. So whenever you create an object, a custom adapter, you're going to accept a string and just treat it as foods, and for the layout, for each individual row or list item, use custom row. So it's going to go over to custom row. It says okay. So right now it has this string, and it's looking at this, and obviously as human beings we can say, okay, well the text obviously goes in there, but this program isn't as smart as us, so that's what we have to do right now. So go back to custom adapter, and we're going to create one more method, and this is actually an override method. So hit Alt, Insert, in override methods, and it is called get view. Where you at? Did I just see it? Get view right there. Alright, so what this is, and let me just get rid of all of that. So get view is where we say, hey, for those strings that we passed in, this is where I want you to put them. This is how I want you to lay it out. So the first two rows are actually just housekeeping. If you go to layout inflator, I think I talked to you guys about inflator before. Anytime you see the word inflate, it's kind of, I don't know why Android named it inflate, to be honest. It just means like prepare or get ready for rendering. It's how Android deals with laying things out on your activity. But you can just name it anything you want. Bucky's inflator, that sounds pretty cool. And just set this equal to layout inflator from get context. And by the way, context, I think I just said this, but anytime you see context, it just means background information. Boring stuff. Alright, now the important part is this. View custom view, and this is essentially going to be equal to one custom row. So yeah, view row tomato tomato. But if you set this equal to Bucky's inflator, inflate R dot layout custom row, or whatever you named your file right there, parent, and false, and that just has to deal with if you inflate anything to a parent, but we aren't worried about that. So the next thing we have to do is just get a reference to everything. 3 different things. The first thing we need is a reference to these strings right here. The second thing we need is a reference to this text element, and the third thing is a reference to this. So to do that, it's pretty simple. The first thing I'm going to do is get single food item, and that's just something in my array. And in order to do that, just put get item position, because these, did I say these? This, can't even talk today, of course, is the position of each item in your list, and we saw that in the last tutorial. Well, actually like 3 tutorials ago, whatever. So now we just want to get a reference to that text element that we created last time. Of course, that's a text view. And our custom view, which is a reference to this file. Remember, on here, what we can do is we can just call find view by ID r.id.bucky's text, and do the same thing with image. So that was actually an image view, Bucky's image, and set this equal. Actually, I don't think I gave that image an ID. Alright, so, well, I did now, sucker. So this is Bucky's image, and set this equal to image view, custom view, find view by ID, and that's r.id dot Bucky's image. Where you at? There you are. There you are. Alright, so now we have a reference to everything that we need. Now, pretty self-explanatory. We're going to take Bucky's text, which is that text element on the activity, and we're just going to set the text of it to whatever food item it's referencing. The next thing we want to do is take that Bucky's image, and in order to change the image, you actually call set image, not image resource right there. Now, of course, r.drawable.chunky. Alright, so again, what this is going to do is it's going to change the text dynamically to each one of these items. However, since I didn't feel like loading in a bunch of different images or sticking those in an array, I'm just calling the same one over and over again. So it's just going to show my face over and over and over again. But of course, later on, whenever you make an actual app, you would obviously want to change that, unless you made an app and you just wanted to see my face a bunch of times, which I don't blame you, because I'm beautiful. But the last thing we have to do here is just return custom view. So of course, this, which we just created, the whole point of these tutorials is create a custom view, so we have to return it, essentially saying, hey, use that. Now, the last line of code that we have to do is this. Right now, our adapter is still using this basic boring adapter, and obviously we just made this sweet custom one so we can use this cool row. So let's change this right here. Now the first thing you do is, well, we can keep the same name, why the heck not, but instead of array adapter, actually we can just delete all that. Alright, so of course, instead of array adapter, which was that boring built-in one, let's go ahead and set this equal to custom adapter. Thank you very much. Now, of course, this for the constructor, remember it's just the context, which is background information, and the second thing is passing that foods array. So of course, foods, and boom, there you go. So I mean, that's that, ladies and gentlemen. So let me go ahead and pause it and run it, and hopefully we don't got any bugs. And check it out, we now got custom rows, ham, tuna, candy, meatball, potato. Clicking it, and it says potato. Meatball, this is the best app ever. Alright, so there you go. Obviously, this is the coolest app ever because it looks like all of your contacts are me, and these are all my nicknames. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you create not only apps with, let me get this out of this, trying to explain this here in Android Studio, but that is how you create apps with list views using generic layouts and also custom layouts right there. So thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will smell y'all later. Alrighty, hosses, welcome back to another video, and in this tutorial we're going to start learning about SQLite. And by the way, I just watched the movie Gone Girl. It's a pretty decent movie, and also if anyone has any really good movies that they would recommend, looking for like a good sci-fi movie, my favorite ones of all time are Contact, and there's this movie called Surrogates. It's a really good movie. I would recommend it. So what were we talking about? SQLite. So what this is a way to save information on your phone. So if you ever had like a computer game and you wanted to save the high scores, or maybe you're making like a checklist app and you wanted the user to be able to turn off their phone, then turn back on and have all that stuff saved for them, well then this is a tutorial for you. So before we get started, forewarning, you do need to know SQL, or at least the basics of it. If you don't, then go watch my tutorial. It's called My SQL Databases. If you go to my website, click Video and Tutorials, My SQL Databases, and it'll teach you the basics of SQL. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. What I did in this video is I made a brand new project, blank activity. We just got those two default files right now, and I'm gonna drink some Gatorade, or Powerade actually. Flavor is that? Lemon lime, not bad. Alright, so let's go ahead and delete this text view. And again, this example is just going to be for creating a really basic database. It's actually just a file that you can save stuff to. So I'm just going to have somewhere that the user can type something in, and they can either add it to the file or delete it from the file. And whenever we turn off the app and turn it back on, it's all going to be saved for you. So pretty simple example, so let's go ahead and get started. So again, the first thing is just a plain text. Drag that somewhere in the top middle. And that's really tiny right now, so change the width to like 300 dp, and change the ID of this as well. And I'll just put like Bucky's input. So this is where the user is going to be typing stuff in. And let's add two buttons right there, and let's add another one right there. So this first one is going to be if they want to add something to the file, then they're going to type it in and click this button. So let's change the text on it so they know what's going on. We'll say add, simple enough, and let's give it an ID of add button. Yes. Now on click, what do you want? What method do you want to call add button click? So this method is where we're going to be writing our functionality to actually add whatever they typed in to the database file so we can save it. So that looks pretty good. Now let's do the same for this button. So let's change the text first. Just change it to delete. So whenever they click this, it's going to delete one of those items. We'll say that this is, I don't know, just storing different items, whatever they type in. And on click, we'll just write like delete button clicked. And for the ID of this, of course, we'll just name it delete button. So again, what I want to do is we can just make an example that can save all your data in the background, and typically that's what you want to do. However, just so we can see what's going on in real time, I'm going to drag a large text in the drop middle of the screen right there, and I'm going to change the ID of this to Bucky's text. So again, all of the contents of the file are going to display in real time right here. So whenever we add, it's going to display in real time. as soon as we delete something, you're going to see it visually being deleted. Now, of course, you would only want to do this whenever they like finish the game or whenever they add a new item to their checklist, but for this example, it'll work out just fine. Alright, so just so this example makes a little bit more sense, we'll say that we have some store, what we're selling, who knows right now, but we have some store and we want an app to keep track of all of our products. So, I just figured if we have some background information, that'll probably be a little bit easier to follow. So what we need now is if you go in your Java directory and expand your first package, right click, new Java class. So make a class called products and hit OK. Now how we're going to set this up is like this. Each row in that database file that we save, it needs to be able to be represented by an object through Java. So then we can work with it in our code. Rearrange this. Alright. So whenever you have your table set up, you're going to have different columns. So we'll have like a column for ID number of the product and also the product name. It'll be a really simple table. So therefore, if we want to represent it through a Java object, that object needs those two properties, an ID number and a product. So for every column, you need an additional property. Pretty simple once you see what's going on. So let me tighten this up, and the first thing that I want to do is just add those properties. So private int underscore ID. Now always name, whenever you have a table, you have that primary key, primary ID. Whenever you reference it in Java, make sure that you call it underscore ID, and Android depends on this underscore ID for a lot of things, so don't get like too creative with the names. Now, of course, this is the ID of each product. Another thing we want to do is we want to add another variable for product name. So again, this is going to be a really simple example. If later on you ever want to add like the color of the product or the type, category, size, whatever, you can just add more variables, which will essentially add more properties to your object. But for right now, just a simple example. Now after this, what I want to do is I want to add a constructor. So whenever we create an object, what's going to happen is we're going to allow the user to type in a name. So therefore we make a constructor with the product name being passed in, whatever they type in, like tuna or something, and then we'll just give it an ID number dynamically. It'll be auto increment, so the first one will always be 0, next one 0, 1 2 3, so on and so forth. So actually, since this is just being passed in, we don't need that underscore. Alright, so again, all of our code in the constructor, all this is going to do is essentially they're going to pass in a product name, and it's going to set this property right here of the object equal to whatever name they passed in. Simple enough. Now, the only thing I want this class to be able to do is be able to work with that product object. So this is going to be the easiest thing you ever learn. If you hit Alt Insert, you just need to add all your setters. And of course, a setter allows you to give that object one of these properties, so we can give it an ID, or we can give it a product name. That's what setters do. And your getter. So Alt Insert. And of course, whenever we want to retrieve, say we're trying to print out the product name or get the ID for something, that's what the getters do. And this is it, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I want this product class to be able to do. So we can create new products, and then we can either give them IDs or names, or get their IDs and names. Pretty simple stuff. Alright guys, so one other thing I want to do before we move on to the next file is this. I actually forgot to public products. I just want to make an empty constructor, so then we aren't constrained to having to make a product name or pass in a product name every time we want to create a product object. If we ever decide we just want to create an object and then set the name later on, we can do that with initializing it with an empty constructor. So after this, what I want to do is I want to actually add a new class, and I'm going to call this class my DBhandler. Now, people typically call these DB managers or DB handlers, and what they are is it's going to be a class specifically for working with that database, with that file that we can save on the user's device. So let me delete this first and paste in all my imports. And while you copy these down, I'll explain this. So this class is going to be responsible for everything that you do with the database. Whenever you create a new database, whenever you upgrade a database, whenever you add products or items to that database, anything that pretty much if you're trying to do something in the sentence involves the word database, this is what this class is going to be responsible for. Now, another thing that I would highly recommend is after you type all the code from this tutorial, keep it and set it aside, because whenever you want to work with this again, pretty much whenever you want an app that can save stuff, you can just paste this in, change a few variables, and it's going to work fine. So, the first thing we need to do in order to use the SQL database, we need to extend SQL open helper right here. So it's giving us some errors because it says, okay, there are a couple things that you need to do whenever you inherit from this class. Now we'll get to those in just a sec, but for right now, let me just go ahead and make a few variables. So we need to set up a few variables for A, what do you want to name the database? What do you want your table to be named, in variables that store each column name. So let's do that right now. So private static final int. The first one is database version. Now for right now, just set this equal to 1 because this is the very first time we're creating this database and I spelled version wrong. So this is our first database version. It's going to consist of one table, and that table is going to be able to store however many items you want, and those items are going to have an ID and a product name. Cool, pretty cool app. Oh, wait a minute. All my users are complaining because they want to be able to store the color of their products as too. Well, now I need a new database structure, so whenever you update your database, you're going to have to upgrade the version as well, and that just makes the rest of your app compatible with the information that you're trying to store. Simple enough. So now, let me copy these. Private static final string, and make a constant called database name. Now, of course, essentially what we're doing is we are saving the user's information to a file, so that way they can turn off their phone, go use other apps, and come back to here and it's saved. So inside the database name is just, what do you want to name the file? Well, I'm just going to name it product.db, whatever, or products, might as well, since they're probably going to store a couple in here. Name it whatever you want, but make sure you have that DB extension. That tells Android that there is a database file stored in here. So after this is pretty much just MySQL stuff. Public static final string table products, and what this is just the name of your table. So remember how MySQL works is you have a database and you can store a bunch of different tables inside that one database. Now for this example, we're just going to have one table in it, but of course that table still needs a name, and I'm going to name mine products. Now the only other two variables or constants that you need are this: the names of your columns. So again, they're strings, and I'm going to name it column underscore ID. And this is of course the ID, and if you just copy this, and however many columns you have in your table, then just add a new constant for each, but I'm only going to have 2. Product name, and of course this is just product name. So again, if we ever decide to update our structure of the database, then we're going to need to change the version. This is just the file that you're saving on the device, the file's name. This is the name of your table, and for every single column in your table, just go ahead and make it a constant, so then if we ever have to change it, we don't have to change it a million times, only right here. So now let's go ahead and get rid of these errors. So these errors are saying, in order to use SQL storage on your phone, you need to do three things. You first need the constructor. Second, and we have to do some stuff to here, but I'm just going to show you guys what you need. Second, you need to override two methods. So let's go ahead and override methods, and that is onCreate and onUpgrade. Now, as soon as you add those, then the errors go away, but of course we need to understand what these mean. So the constructor is essentially just for housekeeping stuff. We need to pass some information along to the superclass, pretty much the class that works directly with Android and takes care of all the behind the scenes stuff for the SQL. So the first thing we need is context, which is this background information, which is fine. The next one is the name of your database. Oh, look at that, already took care of it right there. So pass along the name so it knows which file to save it under, and the factory background information. Now the version is what database version are you working with. Boom, roasted. Now, what are these methods right here? Well, the reason that we needed these methods are because it's saying, okay, whenever you create this table for the first time, what do you want me to do? Well, right now it's doing nothing, but of course it needs to know what you want to do, so that's why it made you implement this method. And this onUpgrade, if you ever are upgrading your version, then it's going to call this right here. So again, the very first time that we run this, it's going to call this onCreate method, so it would probably be a good idea in here to create that table so we can store stuff in it. So in order to do this, if you ever worked with PHP or anything, it's probably going to be pretty easy. But we first need to make a new query. And you can name your variable anything you want. I just like naming it query. And the query of this is going to be create table, just like normal SQL. And of course, we need to pass table products. In other words, your table name. So create table called products. Now after here, it's saying, okay, well, what columns do you want? So add that little parenthesis, and now you give the names of all your columns. So the first one is ID. My nose is kind of like stuffy or something right now. Alright, let me just set up the structure for this first. Alright, so for each row, actually let me just finish typing everything, and then it'll probably make a lot more sense. Alright, so again, this is probably the best way to set up your query. Create a table, and then after it you write the name of your table, which will be products, and then inside these little parentheses right here, you pretty much write the information about each column you want created with your table. So for the ID, what properties do we want for the ID? Well, this is pretty easy. Obviously, we want it to be an integer, a number. We also want it to be the primary key so that it can't be duplicated. So this is pretty much the unique identifier for this. And the last one is auto increment. So that way we don't need to pass it a number manually every time. It automatically increases by 1, saves us a bunch of code. Now for the product name, this is a little bit easier. The only thing we're going to write in here is text. Since we're going to be storing a word like ham, tuna, Powerade, Kleenex, whatever. I'm really just looking at everything around my computer. I see a Powerade, a Kleenex. It's for blowing my nose, people, not what you probably would think. And of course I have a huge Christmas ham and a tuna that I rest my feet on instead of a footstool. Anyways, moving on. Not important, and this is definitely not weird at all. Let's go ahead and take db.exec SQL and pass our query in here. So this is essentially how we execute queries on Android, simple stuff. Now DB got passed in by the SQL database, so we don't have to worry about that. And exec SQL, whoa, it's kind of weird to say. It means execute the SQL query. What query do you want to execute? Well, how about this one that we just created? So again, whenever it creates this database for the very first time, it's going to create this table right here, and once it's created, we can start storing some products in it. Alright guys, welcome back to another tutorial, and in this video, actually before we get started, I want to tell you guys a little story. I don't know if you guys have been noticing, but in like the last 10 videos, I've been breathing really heavy. Actually, have been having a hard time breathing. And also, I know you guys can't see my house, but my house has been getting really dusty really quickly all of a sudden. Like, I would clean it one day, and then the next day it would just be dusty again. And I'm like, alright, I know I'm not that dusty of a guy, so what the heck? So when my last video was processing like 5 minutes ago, I had an idea to go down in my basement, and I looked in my it's kind of like my heater where all my air goes through, and the filter for my air duct system, it was caked in dust. So as soon as I opened the metal door and I looked at it, I was like, holy crap, that is what I've been breathing. So even now you guys can probably hear me. I just changed it like 5 seconds ago. But yeah, definitely found the solution to that. So good health, here I come. And it'll probably take a while for, you know, like all the fresh air to run through and for the dust to collect. But public service announcement, check your air filters for your duct system, even if you've been like breathing normal, because I don't know. Alright, wow, I wasted a minute and a half telling you about my breathing problem, so let's get started with the tutorial. So again, whenever your database is first created, it calls this, and all this does is it creates a new table. So on upgrade means, okay, I changed my database structure, or I just want to upgrade my database for something. So what do we want to do in here? Well, what we need to do is we need to execute a query, and essentially we're just going to say drop the current table or delete the current table and then create a new one. So hopefully you would have new code in here, maybe with like more columns or less columns if you wanted less columns. But the first thing we need to do is delete the current table. So drop table if, and this needs to be in quotes because it's a string. Alright, so drop table if exists, and after this you just write the name of your table, so table products. So this right here, drop means delete in SQL language, so this is going to delete the table. And in the next line of code, obviously if you just left it like this, you would have no table to work with. So what you need to do is you would actually need to call that onCreate method again and pass it along DB because it takes this parameter. So again, that's all we're going to do on an upgrade. Delete the current table and then create a new one with the new structure, whatever it is. Alright, so we took care of all the housekeeping stuff. Now what I want to do is I'm going to add 3 more really easy methods. Now remember I said this class right here is for working directly with your database. So we're going to add one method for adding a new row, which is essentially a new product to the database. We're going to add another one for deleting a product from the database. And I'm going to add one more. And the last method is just take your database and convert it to a string. Now the reason I want to do that is because then we can print it out right here. Alright, pretty cool. So the first thing is, hold on a sec. Just take a drink. Oh, wow, that tastes good. Alright. So where was I? Alright. So let me just say add a new row to the database. I probably should start commenting all of these methods. I think I'll do that from now on. Probably a little bit easier to follow. So public void add product, Now, whenever we add a new product to a database, what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass it in a product object, because each of these objects is going to have an ID and a product name. So what we can do is we can just put product, and then we can extract the information, and it'll be a lot easier to work with that way. So what we want to do here is write content values. Now, content values is a really handy way. It's actually a class that's built right into Android, but it allows you to set a bunch of different values for different columns, and then they allow you to insert all of them in one statement. So it just makes inserting rows into your table really quick and easy. If you don't really follow along with it, you will understand in like 2 seconds by the time we get done coding this method. So right now I'm just going to store it in a variable called values. It's essentially a list of values. That's all. So new content values. Alright, so the first value we want to put in here is put in, as you can see, it takes 2 parameters. The first one is what column do you want to be storing this in? Well, we'll just say that the product name is all we're worried about. And the second one is what is the value that you want to put in that column. So whenever we pass in a product, what we can do is we can actually call a method called get product name, and that's going to retrieve the product name for that, and of course doesn't take any parameters. So essentially we're going to put the product's name into that column. Now we actually do need to do a couple more things first in order for this to work. The first thing is we need this object right here. This object is pretty much our key to the database, so we can just treat it as DB and set this equal to get writable database. So again, this DB symbol right here is now equal to the database that we're going to write to. Simple enough, obviously. Now, instead of just calling execute SQL, there's actually some other methods you can call on your database. One of those is insert. Now, the insert takes 3 different parameters, and actually if you ever do this, if you ever want to know the parameters or more information about a method, select that method and hold down Control and hit Q on your keyboard. So the first thing is the table. The second one is, we actually don't even need to worry about the null second parameter. And the third one is the values, and it takes it in content values. Oh, look at that, we have that right there. So the first thing is the name of your table, which is table products. The second one is that optional null. I'll tell you guys about this in probably the next tutorial. And the third one is a list of values. Oh, well, look at that. We only have 1 item in here, but it'll do for now. Now, this line, of course, is going to insert a new product or a new row into your table. And the last thing that we have to do is, just for housekeeping, we need to close your database to say, okay, Android, we're done with it. You can have that memory back. So after we add the functionality to add a product, again, that's going to happen whenever they click add. What I want to do now is make the method to delete product from the database. That is a lot easier whenever I add those comments. Give myself some room. Alright. So public void delete product, and in here we're going to pass in string product name. Alright. So this is how we're going to delete products. Alright, so whenever, let's say that our list of products was tuna, ham, and meatball. So if they ever want to delete a product, they can just type meatball right here and click delete, and then it's going to search your table for meatball and delete any meatball instances. So again, if they ever want to add something, type the name and add it. If they ever want to delete something, type the name of the product they want to delete and hit delete. So therefore, we pass in product name, which is going to be whatever they typed in. And what we're going to do after this is first, actually we can just copy that whole thing. I don't need to explain that again. Get a reference database, just like before, and we can just call DB execute SQL. There are different methods that you can call on this object, but this is probably the easiest way. Now, in order to delete a single row from a table, we don't want to use drop, because drop means delete the entire table. What we want to do is we want to delete from, and then after this you need the name of your table, which is delete from this table, where, and then it says what clause do you want to use to delete from. Well, we just want to delete wherever the column product name, and actually let me make sure I don't type this weird. Alright, so we want to do equals, so equals, and then we want to escape that. And product name. So 1 second, I'll talk you guys through. I just want to make sure I don't mess anything up, because I could potentially do that. And it looks pretty good right now. So again, whenever you want to delete something from your table, you're going to hit delete from this table wherever the product name is equal to whatever product name we passed in, which is going to be whatever they typed in. And of course, end your SQL statement with a semicolon, and this semicolon is just for ending this line of code right there. Alright guys, so the last method I want to add to this little class is just a method to print out the database as a string, just so we have something to display for this example. And this isn't even really part of the tutorial. I just want to do this real quick. So we'll say print out the database as a string. Alright, so public string database to string sounds like a good name for it. And what is this? Give me, that is because I named it products. Alright, so that was annoying me. Alright, so anyways, to print out the database as a string, we probably need a variable to save it in. Again, I'm just going to do this real quick, so try to explain everything though. Alright, now we need a reference to the database, and how about that reference? Looks good. Alright, now we need a query to query the entire database, so string query, set this equal to select all from, why are you not in where you're supposed to be? Select all from the table, and the table is table products, where, pretty good. Might as well just copy that whole thing. Alright, so the query to select all the data is select star. This means everything from this table, where one also means every condition is met. So this means select every column, and this means select every row. Alright, so now that we have a query, again, this tutorial doesn't really deal with cursors or anything, but just so I don't leave you guys hanging, a cursor is going to point to a location in your results. So just think of it like a pointer, where if this was the first row, then it would point to here. If it was the second row, it would point to here. It's just so Android can manage where you are in your results and what you want to print out and everything like that. And the object for that is C. And if you just call DB raw query, then you can pass your query in null. So now we have a pointer, and to move it to the very first location, move to the first row in. Again, so this is a cursor, and the results that it is pointing to is the results of this query, and to move it to the very beginning, we just call move to first on it. Not really important, but you know. Now what I want to do is I want to say while not C dot is after last, And I'll explain this in just a second, guys. So get string, and in the parameter here, get column index, and the index is product name, and make sure that this is not equal. No. Alright. So what this is pretty much saying is the C, which is your cursor, is after last. You want to make sure that it's not positioned after the last row. This is essentially saying make sure that you still have some results to go. When you're done parsing through all of the results, of course, I guess we can just end this now. Probably makes sense if you just close your database. And since this method needs to return a string, we're just going to return the database string. So of course, this is essentially going to loop through each row in your database. So every time we loop through a row, we just want to tack on some information on the string that we're going to return, because the string that we return is going to be printed out right here. So again, I know this is a real quick one too, but this is kind of like extra bonus stuff for your tutorial. So in order to add stuff onto the string, plus equals C, the cursor get string, and this is C dot get column index product name, and then db plus equals, and I just want to bump it onto a new line, and that is because this is not a string. Alright, so in order to get, let's say we had three different products, so we would have three different rows. Each of those products would have an ID and a name. So it would be like apples, bacon, and cats. Say that it was the weirdest store in the world. All this would do is it would loop through all the results in your table, every single product, and every time it did, it extracted the name of that product and added it to the string. And this just makes it on a new line, because if we didn't, then it would just say like apples, bacon, cats, and it would all run on one single line, and it would look kind of weird. So again, this is what all this is doing. Let me clean this up a little bit, and alright, looks good to go. So now the only thing that we have left to do is we need to hop back in main activity, and we can actually delete both of these right there, and we just need to make it so the interface right here can interact with this database handler. Pretty simple, so we'll actually do that in the next tutorial. Alright guys, so finally we get to the easy part. Now that we're done typing all the hard code, the background functionality to pretty much make our app work with the SQL database, what we can do is just say, okay, this is the button to add a product, this is the button to delete a product. We essentially just need to hook up our interface with the code, simple enough, and we do that through main activity. So all of my imports that we're going to need are right there, so you can just copy all of those. Now let's just go ahead and get a reference to everything on our interface, all of those widgets. So edit text, we called that Bucky's input. Text view, we called that Bucky's text. That's where we're going to be printing everything out. And remember, my DBhandler, we'll just call this DBhandler. Alright, so now let's go ahead and on create and do the housekeeping stuff. So Bucky's input, set this equal to edit text, find view by ID, r.id dot Bucky's input, and the same thing with Bucky's text equals text view, find view by ID, r.id dot Bucky's text. Now after this, we need to set our DBhandler object, and of course that's equal to new, what was that, my DBhandler. Now remember, whenever we create a new database handler, it takes, where's a constructor, 4 parameters. The context, which is just going to be the keyword this from the other class, and we can just use null for the name of the database, because we already set it equal to the constant right here, we can pass null in for factory, and it'll do all of that behind the scenes. And for the last one, we need to pass an int, so we can just pass in 1, but it'll actually get the value from right here. So again, that's this for the context, null, null, 1. Essentially, we're just letting this class take care of all the hard stuff, and we already talked about that before. Now, we're going to have 3 methods in here. One method is going to be for this add button. Remember, we said on click, call the add button clicked. Another method is going to be for the delete button clicked. And the last method is just going to be for printing this out. It's going to be real simple, like 3 lines of code. So whenever we do that, we'll just call a method called print database. It won't even take any parameters at all. And it's giving us an error because we need to implement that method right there. So this is just going to be public void, and it's not going to take any parameters. The only thing that it's going to do is it's going to set the text of this to whatever we retrieve when we call database to string. Simple enough. So the first thing we need is a string, and we might as well just reference it through dbstring and set it equal to the database handler dot, and remember that method was called database to string. So this is what we coded in the last tutorial, and we're just taking whatever string we retrieved, which pretty much is the product name of every single row, and we're going to store it in that variable. And now we just take that Bucky's text, which is our text widget, and set the text, not set enabled, set the text equal to dbstring. And after this, what I want to do is I want to take Bucky's input, and I also want to set the text equal to blank right there. And the reason I want to do this is because, well, I'll explain this in just a second. Essentially, we are going to print the database, whatever is in our file, after we add a new item or after we delete an item. So whenever we type watermelon and add it, then what's going to happen is it's going to print out watermelon down here, but then just to make it a little bit easier on the user, we automatically are going to erase the text that was in here, so that way they didn't add watermelon and the word watermelon still chilling up there. So this just makes it a little bit easier on the user if you refresh their input for them, so they don't have to delete it manually. So now to the database. Alright, so now we have to implement that add button clicked. So public void add button clicked. And that's also why we didn't need a reference to those buttons up here, because whenever we add the onClick method, it pretty much takes care of all the hard work for us, which is really awesome. Alright, so product, and set this equal to new products, Bucky's input dot get text dot to string. And let me type all this and then I'll explain what's going on. So DBhandler, add product, and print the database. Alright, so whenever they click the add button, what we want to do is we want to say, okay, they're going to have type something in here, like, I don't know, what's something that you can have in your store? Tennis shoes. So we're going to take tennis shoes, add it to the database, so we're going to save it to a file, and then we're going to display tennis shoes down here. Now if you look in our code, whenever we add a new product to the database, we don't just add the string, we actually create a new product object, and every time we create a product object, it sets the product property to whatever we passed in, like tennis shoes. So remember, this is the database handler, and whenever it adds a product to the database, it only accepts a product object. So if you look, add product, to add a new row to the database, it doesn't accept a string, it only accepts a product object. So whenever we pass in that object, it's going to extract the name, the string value, and then it's going to insert that string into the database. So again, this products is just normal objects, normal Java code. This is making everything compatible so it can insert it or extract it from the database, and this is just hooking up the interface with all of our code. And of course, we know what this does. It pretty much makes a string appear on the screen. And the only method that we need is that delete method, and that's public void delete button clicked. And alright. And also another thing I always forget to do is make sure you pass in your views as your parameters. If you don't, then it's not going to register that onClick method or whatever you set onClick as. Alright, so to delete an item, pretty simple. We take string, and I'll just name it something like input text. Set this equal to alright, so all we're doing here is we're getting whatever text the user jotted down in that little input, and then whenever we call DBhandler, remember we're gonna delete product. Now delete product, this indeed takes a string, so we don't pass the product here, we actually pass the string value. So the input text, we can just pass the string value right there, and then we're going to print out the database on the screen. So again, you can set up your database handler a little bit differently, but this should work. So let me go ahead and start my emulator. Alright, so hopefully whenever we type something like bacon, we can click add and add it to the database, and then we can, let's add a few more tuna. Oops, not press enter. And like meatball. And then if you ever want to delete one, you can just type in tuna and it will delete tuna, or whatever word you type in, it will delete it. And again, I know that I can't really demonstrate it, but if this was installed on a phone, or if you're testing this on a device, then what you can do is you can turn off your device and then you can turn it back on, and all of the information in your database is going to be saved. So pretty cool. And that is pretty much the basics of how to work with the SQLite database to save data. Alright guys, welcome back, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to add a video player to your app. So if you ever want to make an app where the user can play videos, then this is how you do it. However, before we begin, I want to warn you of one thing. Whenever you develop this project and you run it in the emulator is unable to play videos at this moment. I don't know if they're developing a system where they can display videos in the future, but right now the emulator that you make in Android Studio can't display videos. So to test this out, you're probably going to need to run it on an actual device. And if you don't know how to set up an actual device for testing, then I'll make a video in like 10 tutorials probably showing you guys how to do that. But for right now, I just want to warn you guys that if you try to follow along with this and then you run it in the emulator, it's just going to show up as a little black box and you're not going to see anything moving. So nonetheless, this is how you add videos to your app. So start a new Android Studio project, and I'm just going to name mine video player, and make sure that you select API 15, because the packages that we're going to be using, this is the minimum SDK that's going to be compatible. And then click next and just choose blank activity, next. Good enough. Alright, so once everything is done, finished being set up, we have our design file and of course the main activity. So the first thing I want to do is mention this. You see how we have this text view by default? We're going to delete this in a little bit, but take note of where it is. So we position this within our relative layout, but we still have this bit of padding around the left hand side and the top. Now this is because if you go in your source code view, actually let me clean up my properties a little bit so you guys can see what's going on a little bit easier. So by default, this relative layout was given to us by 16 dps of padding around the edge. Now whenever I plop that video player in there, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that in just a bit, I want it to butt up against the side of the screen. I don't want it to look like it's floating in the middle. So what we can do is we can actually select all of this padding from the relative layout and just delete it. And now if you go back to your design view, you can see that the widgets are now butted right up against the edge. Pretty cool. So of course we don't need this text view, so we can just select that and delete it. Now what we do need in order to play videos is one widget. So if you scroll down to containers, right here you're going to see this widget called video view. So take this widget and drag it right on your relative layout and just release. So by default it takes up the entire screen. Good enough. Now the only other thing we have to do for the design is select that video view, and we need to give it an ID. So I'm just gonna name this, what can I name it, like Bucky's video view. Hit enter, and now we can reference it through our code. Alright, so hop over to main activity, because this is all the interface is going to be. Probably the easiest GUI we ever designed. So again, hop over here, and the first thing I want to do is delete these last two methods. These are just for the menu, and I don't really need those. I just want to keep this tutorial very simple, very basic. Alright, so what we need to do is we need to import two things. So import Android.widget, of course, the video view, and we already saw what that was. And the next thing I want to import is this, Android.widget.media controller. Now by default, this video view is going to be capable of displaying just pure videos. Now this media controller is pretty much the video player like you would think of it. And by that I mean all of the buttons like the play button, the pause button, the stop button. So if we just want to display a video to play automatically, then we can just use this video view. But if we want to allow the user the ability to play it, stop it, pause it, whatever, then we use this media controller. It's like video controller. So simple enough. So now let me go ahead and do this. So in your onCreate, the first thing we want to do is we want to get a reference to that video view, that area that can display videos. So final video view, Bucky's video view, and of course just set this equal to video view right there, Bucky's video view. So simple enough. Now after this, now that we have a reference to it, in order to say, okay, this is the video that I want to display in this area, we actually need a video. So what I did is I uploaded a real quick sample video. All I did is I actually just recorded my screen, and I went in MS Paint and made a real quick smiley face in this video. I just moved my mouse around and it looks like this little face is talking. So probably the dumbest video ever, but I wanted a real small MP4 file just for testing. So if you guys want the same one, of course you can find any MP4 file on the internet and it'll work. But if you guys want this one, then again, thenewboston.com/forums/project_files/006_testvideo.mp4. Alright, so how do we set the video player to play this video? Well, just take that view and call a method called setVideoPath. Now inside here, you just throw in that string. Pretty simple. So now we said, okay, this video view is going to display this video. And in order to actually play it, you actually call just one last method, and that's videoView.start. So now, if we actually run this, I'll show you guys. Again, remember I said that your emulator isn't going to be capable of displaying the videos, so if you actually want to see, you're going to run it on an actual device. But we can go ahead and run it right now to make sure we don't have any bugs or errors. Alright, now one other thing I forgot is you need to add a permission to your manifest. So, and that's just say that, hey, we want to use the internet, and that's just because we are referencing a file on the internet instead of locally on our device. So again, go to your manifest and add this, and once you run it, you are going to see, let me close out of this, you are going to see this. Now, typically this black box is where the video would play, and actually, whenever you run this program in your emulator, you are going to be able to hear it. You just aren't going to be able to see the video. So your challenge for this tutorial is type in the comment below what this dude is saying, because if you can hear it, then everything's working fine. And also, I want to mention, by default, whenever you take this and flip it horizontally so it's orientated in a different direction, the video is automatically going to stretch to fill up your entire screen. So that's another cool feature about it. So now that that's taken care of, and also I highly recommend doing this on a device, it's going to make a lot more sense. But anyways, now that our video is working, I want to show you guys how to add that optional media controller. And even though it's optional, you probably want to do this like 99% of the time, unless you have, you know, a really important reason not to. But I'll just say player controls, like play, pause, stop, etc. Alright, so the first thing you need to do is you need to get a reference to this media controller class, or the object. So media controller, I just name mine media controller, set it equal to new media controller object. Now we're going to pass in this for context. So now the only thing we have to do is we take that media controller object and we're going to call a method called set anchor view, and for the anchor we need to pass in whatever your view is named right here. So now one last line of code, you actually take this, and I know it's kind of weird, but this is just how it's done. And for the view, you set the media controller, which means, okay, I want to set a video player on this to media controller. You think that they could just do this in one line of code, but that isn't how it's done. So again, 3 simple lines, pretty much get an object which is the video player and set the video's view to that video player. Alright guys, so even though you can't see it, I just ran it on a device and it works fine. And another thing I probably should mention, if you hold down the left control key, you know how you have 2 control keys on your keyboard? One's on the very left bottom corner and one's kind of to the right of your spacebar. If you hold down the left control key and hit F12, it's gonna rotate your emulator. So I thought that it might show if I rotated it, but again, typically whenever you have a video, your video's gonna be right here, and of course all of your player controls are gonna be right here at the bottom. Pause, rewind, forward, all of that good stuff. So again, there you have it. I know you can't see it, but trust me, it's there. If you can hear it, it is working correctly. So for now, thank you guys for watching. In the next video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to use your camera to take images and save them on your device.